$2 squaw of hell's half-acre raven hare's blood price turns Dodge City into a graveyard. The sun had barely begun its climb over the horizon when Ravenhair arrived at the outskirts of Dodge City. The dusty trail leading into town stretched like a golden ribbon beneath the early light, and the wind carried the faint smell of leather, gunpowder, and the earthy aroma of cattle pens. Her long black hair, as dark and smooth as a raven's wing, swayed gently behind her as she walked, catching the light in fleeting flashes. Her eyes, sharp and steady, scanned the town from the moment she could see its wooden buildings rising from the flat plains. There was a quiet tension in her stride, the kind that warned people to keep their distance. Though she wore simple clothes, a worn leather jacket, faded trousers, and a pair of sturdy boots, she carried herself with an authority that made even the most seasoned cowhands pause and look twice. Dodge City was waking slowly that morning. The first wagons rumbled down the main street bringing supplies for the general store and fresh bread for the bakery. Horses nickered and stomped impatiently as their riders tied them to posts outside the saloons and stables. The town's wooden sidewalks creaked under the boots of early risers, a man carrying a milk pail, a woman balancing baskets of vegetables, and a few children running after a stray dog. From the outside, Dodge City appeared peaceful, but Ravenhair could sense the undercurrent of unease. She had heard stories of this town, stories of lawmen who tried and failed, of gangs who ruled with iron fists, and of whispers about a place where debts were paid not just with words, but with blood. And now, she was here. She was about to stir the calm waters whether the town was ready or not. Her first steps took her toward the center of town, where the saloons and gambling halls crowded the streets. The sound of piano keys and laughter drifted from the open doors, mingling with the clatter of spurs on the wooden boards. The smell of strong coffee, frying bacon, and tobacco smoke filled the air. Ravenhair paused at the edge of the sidewalk, letting her dark eyes travel over the familiar faces. There were men with sunburned skin and rough hands, women with stern expressions and bright eyes, and the occasional stranger who had lost his way. She noted the tension in their shoulders, the way some of them glanced nervously toward the saloon doors, and she smiled faintly. A town like this, with so much fear and hidden anger, could be both dangerous and profitable for someone who knew how to navigate it. Ravenhair's reputation preceded her, though few here had ever met her in person. Tales of her past travels and deeds had already begun to echo in the corners of Dodge City. Some called her the $2 squaw, a name meant to mock, but in reality it spoke of her dangerous efficiency and the cost of crossing her path. She had earned that title after years of collecting debts, hunting those who had wronged her, and surviving situations that would have ended a lesser person. Now her presence in Dodge City was like a shadow falling across the town, a shadow that promised change, and for many, fear. She stopped in front of one of the saloons, a large building with a swinging door that creaked every time someone passed through. Inside, the room was lively, filled with the noise of people drinking, laughing, and placing bets on cards. Smoke curled from the wood stove in the corner, giving the place a warm, hazy glow. Ravenhair pushed the door open slowly, letting it swing back with a faint jingle. All eyes turned to her the moment she stepped inside. The laughter dimmed, the piano keys fell silent, and even the bartenders paused mid-pour. There was something about her, not just her appearance, but the way she carried herself, the calm confidence in her movements, and the quiet menace in her eyes. Every person in that room knew, even if only instinctively, that she was not someone to be underestimated. She moved to a table in the corner, deliberately choosing a spot that allowed her to see everyone in the room while remaining partly hidden in shadow. Her eyes scanned the patrons, noting each face, each gesture, each whisper of suspicion or curiosity. She had learned over the years that the smallest detail could reveal the largest truths. The man with a twitching hand might be hiding a weapon. The woman with a forced smile could be carrying secrets. The boy who kept peeking from behind the bar could be listening for something important. Dodge City, like many towns she had visited, was a living puzzle, and she intended to study it carefully before taking her first move. It wasn't long before the whispers began. "Is that? I heard they say she." The stories traveled faster than the wind in Dodge City. and though some were exaggerated, they all carried a kernel of truth that gave the townsfolk reason to worry. Ravenhair had always known that fear was as powerful a weapon as any gun. She did not need to fire a shot to command attention. The mere presence of someone who had nothing to lose and everything to settle was enough to make men reconsider their actions. A few men tried to approach her, claiming friendly intent, offering drinks and asking harmless questions. Ravenhair listened, responding with polite but measured words. She revealed nothing about her plans or past or her purpose for being in Dodge City. Every gesture, every glance, was calculated to maintain control. She wanted them to underestimate her just enough to make their own mistakes. Already she could see the tension building, old grudges surfacing, rivalries reigniting, and the air thick with anticipation. In a place like Dodge City, every small spark could ignite a wildfire, and she was patient enough to let it happen exactly as she intended. By mid-morning, the town had begun to realize that this visitor was unlike any they had seen before. Children peeked from behind doorways, curious about the striking woman with raven hair who carried herself as if the world belonged to her. Shopkeepers paused in their work to glance through windows, speculating about her intentions. Even the sheriff, a man known for his steady hand and sharp mind, observed her from a distance, wary of the potential trouble that followed in her wake. Ravenhair, however, remained composed. Dodge City was a town built on bravado, gunfights, and the constant balance between law and lawlessness. She knew that her arrival would upset that balance, and she was ready for it. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the dirt streets, Ravenhair made her way from the saloon to the edge of town. She observed the alleys, the side streets, and the quieter corners where whispers traveled and deals were made. Dodge City was a living organism, each building, each person, each street contributing to its heartbeat, and she intended to become a part of that pulse, not as a visitor, but as a force that could not be ignored. Her reputation was already working ahead of her, and soon the town would realize that she had come not for trade or pleasure, but for justice, vengeance, and the settling of old scores. Every step she took, every glance she gave was a statement. She was here, she was ready, and Dodge City would never be the same. By late afternoon, a few townsfolk had dared to speak openly about her. "She's trouble," one man said, voice low. "You don't bring trouble like that here and expect to walk away," another replied. But for every warning, there was also a spark of curiosity, a hint of respect, and even awe. Ravenhair moved through Dodge City as both shadow and storm, calm yet undeniable, and the stories of her past began to weave into the fabric of the town's present. And while the sun began its slow descent, casting golden light across the wooden buildings, one thing was certain: the arrival of Ravenhair, the $2 squaw, had already begun to change Dodge City, and the town was on the brink of something it would not forget. The morning after Ravenhair's arrival, Dodge City awoke to a tension that was thicker than the dust on its streets. Her presence lingered like smoke from a distant fire, silent, inevitable, and impossible to ignore. The townsfolk whispered in low voices about the woman with raven hair who had walked into their lives without warning. Some said she was dangerous, others that she was unstoppable, and a few, more daring, wondered if she had come for revenge. Whatever the reason, everyone felt it. The calm that had settled over Dodge City was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that pulsed through the saloons, stables, and even the quiet side streets. Ravenhair, however, moved with purpose. She had not come merely to observe. She had come for something deeper. Her first target was a small gang of men known for controlling the gambling houses and extorting local merchants. They had once wronged her family years ago, and she had tracked them across the plains ever since. They did not know she had arrived, but she had already begun to study them. She observed their habits, their routines, and the people they trusted. Every day she collected information as carefully as a painter laying down the first strokes of a masterpiece. By the time she acted, she wanted her moves to be precise, leaving no room for error. Her first encounter happened late in the morning, at the edge of one of the town's quieter streets. The gang, unaware of her watchful eyes, laughed loudly as they counted coins and boasted about their power over the town. Ravenhair stepped from the shadows, her movements as fluid as water, silent but deadly. The leader, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, barely had time to react before she confronted him. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, yet it carried a weight that made the men pause. "I've come to settle old debts," she said, her dark eyes locking onto his. The gang laughed at first, thinking her words a joke or a bluff, but they quickly realized she was neither joking nor bluffing. Ravenhair moved with a skill that only years of practice and determination could create. She disarmed them with careful, deliberate actions, ensuring that no innocent bystanders were hurt. By the time the sheriff, or anyone else, could arrive, she had made her point clear. She was not to be trifled with. The leader fell to his knees, not from force alone, but from the certainty in her eyes that she would stop at nothing to achieve her goal. Word of the confrontation spread through Dodge City like wildfire. By midday, townsfolk whispered in the saloons, marketplaces, and even behind closed doors about the woman who had faced down a dangerous gang without hesitation. Some were afraid, some were intrigued, and a few brave souls watched from windows and doorways, unable to tear their eyes away from the unfolding story. Ravenhair had begun to leave her mark on the town, and with every action, her reputation grew stronger. She was no longer just a mysterious stranger. She was a force that demanded attention, respect, and caution. Despite her victories, Ravenhair remained careful. She knew that Dodge City was full of hidden dangers. Rival gangs, mercenaries, and bounty hunters lurked in every alley, ready to take advantage of any misstep. She moved strategically, never allowing herself to be caught unprepared. Every encounter, every word, and every gesture was calculated to maintain her advantage. She was a master of patience as much as of skill, understanding that true power was often shown in restraint as much as in action. Her careful planning soon led her to the next stage of her strategy, the townspeople themselves. Ravenhair knew that fear and respect could be just as powerful as guns and violence. She moved among them with quiet confidence, observing their reactions, listening to their conversations, and noting the alliances that shaped Dodge City. She discovered who controlled information, who influenced decisions, and who could be swayed to her side. The town was a living puzzle, and she was beginning to see the pieces clearly. Every person, every building, and every street held a clue to the bigger picture she was forming. As the sun reached its highest point, Ravenhair returned to the saloon where she had first appeared. The room had changed since the previous day. Whispers of her deeds had filled the air, creating a new atmosphere of cautious respect. The pianist played more softly, the laughter was subdued, and even the gamblers paused to look toward the door whenever it opened. Ravenhair moved with calm purpose, her eyes scanning the room for anyone who might pose a threat or offer an opportunity. She was both observer and actor, taking in every detail while carefully placing herself at the center of the town's attention. It was there in the saloon that she first encountered a man who would become a key figure in her plans. He was a quiet, unassuming individual at first glance, but Ravenhair noticed the way his hands moved, the way his eyes studied the room, and the subtle tension in his posture. He had knowledge, connections, and influence, tools that could either aid her or hinder her, depending on how she chose to approach him. With careful words and measured gestures, she tested his reactions, gauging his loyalty and character. By the end of their conversation, she had decided that he could be an ally, someone who might assist her in the coming conflicts while maintaining her edge in the town. But Dodge City was not a place where trust came easily, and Ravenhair was careful to remember that. Even as she began to form alliances, she remained aware of the dangers surrounding her. Betrayal could come from the most unexpected directions, and she had learned over the years that vigilance was as essential as courage. She never let her guard down, always keeping one step ahead of those who might wish her harm. Every interaction was a test, every smile a question, and every gesture a signal to measure the intentions of those around her. By late afternoon, Ravenhair had begun to understand the rhythm of Dodge City. She saw the patterns of daily life, the power struggles that played out in quiet corners, and the undercurrent of fear and ambition that influenced every action. The town, once calm and predictable, had shifted under her influence. People moved differently, watched more carefully, and spoke with hushed voices. She had not fired a single shot yet, but her presence alone had begun to shape the town in her image, a place where caution and respect were necessary for survival. As evening approached, the streets of Dodge City became alive with the glow of lanterns and the chatter of townsfolk preparing for the night. Ravenhair made her way back to the outskirts, pausing to watch the sky turn shades of orange and purple. She reflected on the day's events, the confrontation with the gang, the observation of the townspeople, and the subtle formation of alliances. Each moment had been carefully orchestrated, each action deliberate, and each result adding to her growing influence. She understood that her path in Dodge City was just beginning, and that the true challenges, the battles that would define her legacy, were still ahead. That night, as she prepared for the days to come, Ravenhair allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She had come to Dodge City seeking revenge, but she had also found something more, a town full of potential, a web of conflicts waiting to be resolved, and a stage on which she could assert her skill, intelligence, and determination. She knew that the next moves she made would shape not only her own fate, but the future of the entire town. Dodge City had already begun to feel the weight of her presence, and by the time her full plan unfolded, it would be a place transformed. Even as the stars emerged above the plains, Ravenhair's shadow stretched long across the town. The people of Dodge City could feel it, though they did not yet understand the depth of her influence. She had begun to collect the first threads of her revenge, and the town was quietly holding its breath. No one knew exactly what would happen next, but all could sense that the calm was gone, replaced by the presence of someone who had nothing to lose and everything to settle. The story of the $2 squaw was only beginning, and Dodge City was about to learn just how powerful she could be. The days following Ravenhair's arrival in Dodge City were filled with a tense, almost electric energy. The town had begun to adjust to her presence, but it was clear that nothing would ever be the same. People moved more cautiously on the streets, saloon doors opened more quietly, and conversations that once flowed freely were now measured and careful. Everywhere she went, Ravenhair's reputation preceded her. The $2 squaw was not a figure of idle legend. She was a reality that everyone could see, and her influence had begun to shape Dodge City's daily life. Ravenhair, however, was not content to simply watch. She understood that power was not given. It was earned, and often demanded through careful planning and bold action. To maintain her edge, she began to form alliances with some of the town's more cunning residents. Not the lawmen, who might try to stop her, nor the easily intimidated townsfolk, but the ones who operated in the shadows, gamblers, merchants who owed debts, and a few mercenaries who had nowhere else to turn. Each person she approached had a reason to follow her, whether out of fear, loyalty, or opportunity. She was careful to ensure that her alliances were strong enough to be useful, but not so close that betrayal could strike too easily. The first of these alliances began with a man named Silas Crane. Silas was quiet and unassuming, running a small trading post on the edge of town, but Ravenhair quickly recognized his influence. He knew the flow of goods, the movements of the gangs, and the secrets people tried to hide. She approached him one morning, standing calmly in the doorway of his shop, her raven hair catching the light as she spoke. "I need someone who sees more than what's in front of them," she said simply. Silas studied her carefully, weighing her words. He had heard the stories, of course, but seeing her in person carried a different weight. By the end of their conversation, he had agreed to assist her, intrigued by her intelligence and skill. At the same time, she began observing her enemies more closely. The gang she had first confronted was not willing to forget their defeat. They whispered among themselves, planning revenge and trying to gauge her weaknesses. Ravenhair watched from the shadows as they made their moves, noting every misstep, every hesitation, and every sign of overconfidence. She knew that in Dodge City any false step could be deadly, but so could hesitation. She had learned that patience, strategy, and careful observation often meant more than brute force. But as her alliances grew, so too did the dangers. Not everyone she trusted could be relied upon completely, and betrayal was a constant threat. One of her newest allies, a man named Jeb Holloway, seemed loyal at first, assisting her in scouting the movements of rival gangs and sharing information about potential threats. However, Ravenhair sensed a subtle shift in his demeanor. A hesitation, a glance too long at the wrong person, a whisper that reached her ears at the right moment. She realized that Jeb might be tempted by greed or ambition, and that she could not afford to ignore the possibility of betrayal. Despite these concerns, Ravenhair continued her careful work in the town. She moved among the streets, observing the interactions of townspeople, listening to whispered conversations and noting the power struggles that often went unseen. Dodge City, with all its noise, chaos, and ambition, was like a living organism, and she was learning its heartbeat. Every building, every alleyway, and every person held a clue to the next step in her plan. She had begun to map the town in her mind, understanding the flow of influence and the vulnerabilities of those who held power. One evening, as the sun began to set and cast long shadows across the streets, a confrontation occurred that would test the alliances Ravenhair had built. Jeb Holloway, tempted by the possibility of personal gain, attempted to strike a deal with one of her rivals behind her back. He underestimated Ravenhair's awareness and her ability to anticipate the actions of those around her. She had been watching him closely, noting his sudden secretive movements and hushed conversations. When he made his move, she confronted him quietly but decisively. Her voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge that left no room for argument. "Loyalty is not optional," she said. Jeb realized instantly that he had miscalculated. Ravenhair had not only anticipated his betrayal but had also positioned herself to neutralize it without unnecessary bloodshed. The townspeople had begun to take notice of these subtle displays of power. They saw how she handled betrayal, how she influenced others, and how she moved through the town with both confidence and caution. Stories spread quickly, how she had disarmed a gang without violence, how she had gained the loyalty of key residents, and how she had uncovered betrayal before it could harm her. These stories, whispered in saloons, markets, and homes, strengthened her reputation. Fear mingled with admiration, and the people of Dodge City realized that Ravenhair was more than just a threat. She was a force shaping their lives in ways they could barely understand. As the days passed, the balance of power in Dodge City began to shift. Rival gangs, sensing the change, started to test her, hoping to find a weakness. Some approached cautiously, pretending to negotiate or offer friendship, while others acted more boldly, attempting intimidation or subtle sabotage. Ravenhair met each challenge with careful strategy. She allowed some to see her strength, used others as tools to uncover deeper plots, and maintained alliances that kept her informed and protected. Every action was a chess move, each decision carefully measured to increase her advantage while minimizing risk. Her influence reached beyond the immediate confrontations with gangs. Merchants, farmers, and ordinary townsfolk began to recognize her authority, even if they did not fully understand her motives. She moved among them respectfully but decisively, showing that she had no intention of harming those who were innocent or loyal. This combination of fear and fairness made her presence even more powerful. People learned that while crossing her could be dangerous, following her could offer protection and opportunity. In a town like Dodge City, where trust was scarce and danger was common, this balance made her almost untouchable. Yet, even as her alliances strengthened and her enemies faltered, Ravenhair knew that the most dangerous threats often came from within. She could see it in the eyes of some of her allies, the fleeting glances, the hesitant words, and the unspoken ambitions. She understood that survival in Dodge City required constant vigilance, not only against outward threats but also against betrayal from those closest to her. She maintained careful control, ensuring that every ally remained useful but not so powerful that they could challenge her authority. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Ravenhair had solidified her place in Dodge City. She had formed alliances, identified potential threats, and neutralized the first signs of betrayal. The town was no longer merely a place she had entered. It had become a stage upon which she would play her complex game of influence, strategy, and revenge. Her presence had shifted the rhythm of daily life, and the people, whether they knew it or not, were adjusting to her rules. That night, as she surveyed the town from a quiet rooftop, Ravenhair reflected on the delicate balance she had created. She had gained allies, confronted threats, and begun to understand the deeper currents of power in Dodge City. Yet she also knew that the most significant challenges were still ahead. Rival gangs, ambitious townsfolk, and hidden dangers waited, ready to test her skill and resolve. She understood that in a place like this, the game was never truly over, and the consequences of a single misstep could be catastrophic. Ravenhair remained vigilant, her mind always calculating the next move. She had learned that patience and intelligence were often more effective than brute force, and that the careful management of alliances could turn potential enemies into instruments of her success. The town of Dodge City, once brimming with chaotic energy, had begun to bend to her presence. Fear, respect, and cautious admiration had created a unique influence, and she intended to use it fully. As the stars appeared above the plains and the quiet of night settled over Dodge City, Ravenhair felt a sense of both anticipation and satisfaction. She had survived the first tests, established a network of allies, and confronted the first challenges to her authority. But she also knew that the story was far from over. Betrayals, confrontations, and battles were yet to come, and her ability to navigate them would determine not only her survival but the future of the town itself. The $2 Squaw had begun her game in Dodge City, and the stakes were higher than ever. In the silent darkness, she allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. She had played her cards carefully, and the next phase of her plan was already taking shape in her mind. The town might not yet understand the full force of her presence, but soon it would. Dodge City was becoming her stage, and every player in it, from loyal ally to treacherous rival, would find themselves moving according to her design. The night carried a quiet promise. The coming days would be filled with tests, confrontations, and the inevitable reckoning, and Ravenhair would be ready to meet each one with skill, precision, and unwavering resolve. Dodge City had changed since Ravenhair's arrival. It was once a town bustling with routine life. Merchants trading goods, children running through dusty streets, cowhands laughing in saloons, was now gripped by an undercurrent of tension that few could ignore. People moved more cautiously, and the town seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next spark that might ignite chaos. Ravenhair had not yet unleashed her full power, but even her presence alone had begun to shape the rhythm of Dodge City. Fear and respect followed her steps, while the sense of stability that once defined the town had begun to crumble. The first sign of the coming storm came in the form of the gangs she had already confronted. They had regrouped, licking their wounds and whispering of revenge in shadowed corners. They were no longer a single group but several factions, each eager to test her skill and challenge her authority. They sent spies into the town, tried to influence merchants, and even attempted to stir distrust among her allies. But Ravenhair was always one step ahead. She had learned to anticipate the moves of her enemies, and she used their own ambitions against them. Every misstep they made, every whisper they spread, only strengthened her understanding of the town and its people. As the days progressed, Dodge City began to feel the strain of her influence. The streets became battlegrounds of tension, where even the smallest disagreement could escalate into violence. Ravenhair moved with careful precision, confronting those who threatened the town's fragile balance, but she also made sure to avoid unnecessary bloodshed. She understood the power of fear and reputation, and she wielded it with skill. People began to whisper not only about her abilities but about the consequences of crossing her path. Her name alone was enough to make even the most hardened criminals think twice before acting. One afternoon, a new challenge presented itself. A gang of outsiders, hearing rumors of the $2 Squaw's presence, rode into Dodge City with the intent of testing her. They were bold and reckless, confident that their numbers would overwhelm any single individual. But Ravenhair had anticipated such a move. She had spent days mapping the town, learning its streets, alleyways, and strategic points. When the gang made their approach, she was ready. She confronted them with calm authority, using her knowledge of the town to create obstacles, confuse their plans, and turn their own tactics against them. In the end, the outsiders were forced to retreat, leaving the town shaken but intact. The people of Dodge City began to see that the town's fate was now intertwined with Ravenhair's actions. Merchants who had once ignored her presence now sought her guidance or protection. Citizens whispered her name in both fear and awe. Even those who had once opposed her began to recognize her skill and determination. She had become more than just a mysterious stranger. She was a force, shaping the town's destiny. Her influence reached beyond the immediate conflicts with gangs, touching every corner of Dodge City's social and economic life. But the town's descent into chaos was not solely the result of external threats. Rivalries that had existed long before Ravenhair's arrival now intensified under her shadow. Families who had once lived side by side began to feud openly, fueled by the uncertainty and fear she had introduced. Old grudges resurfaced, and minor disputes escalated into violent confrontations. Ravenhair did not start these conflicts, but she understood that the chaos could be used to her advantage. By observing the way people acted under pressure, she learned who could be trusted, who could be manipulated, and who posed a true threat to her plans. Her strategic mind allowed her to control much of the unfolding disorder. She moved through the town like a shadow, appearing where needed, disappearing when necessary, and leaving a trail of influence behind her. Citizens began to adjust their behavior, knowing that the $2 squaw was watching. Even small acts of defiance were met with subtle but firm reminders of her authority. She had created a delicate balance in which fear, respect, and careful observation shaped the town's behavior. The people learned quickly that survival required both caution and awareness, and that Ravenhair's presence demanded both. As the days turned into weeks, the body count began to rise, not from mindless violence but from calculated confrontations. Rival gang members, greedy opportunists, and traitorous allies found themselves on the wrong side of her skill and strategy. She moved decisively, leaving the town with a clear message. Loyalty and caution were rewarded. Betrayal and recklessness were punished. The streets of Dodge City, once filled with everyday life, now bore the marks of conflict. Broken fences, abandoned carts, and boarded-up windows were silent reminders of the ongoing struggle for power and control. Despite the chaos, Ravenhair remained focused and disciplined. She understood that unchecked violence could undermine her goals. She sought to channel the town's fear and unrest into a form of order, one that she controlled. By selectively confronting threats, rewarding loyalty, and observing the patterns of the town, she was able to maintain a precarious balance. Dodge City was not peaceful, but it was predictable under her influence. She had become the center of its power, the force around which the town's fate revolved. One particularly tense night, a confrontation erupted that would further cement her reputation. A group of renegades, emboldened by rumors of her absence, attempted to seize control of a key section of the town. They underestimated her awareness and strategic thinking. Ravenhair anticipated their move, positioning herself and her allies to intercept them. The clash was intense, but her careful planning ensured that she maintained control while minimizing unnecessary harm. When the dust settled, the renegades were defeated, and the people of Dodge City saw clearly that no one could challenge the $2 squaw without facing severe consequences. The aftermath of these events left the town in a state of cautious respect. Citizens began to understand that the chaos they witnessed was not random. It was a reflection of the power struggle that Ravenhair both managed and instigated. Her presence demanded attention, compliance, and awareness. The town had become a living testament to her influence, a place where her reputation shaped behavior and decisions at every level. The balance of power had shifted, and Dodge City now existed under the shadow of the $2 squaw. Yet even as she consolidated her control, Ravenhair knew that true mastery required constant vigilance. The town was full of unpredictable elements, hidden rivals, shifting alliances, and individuals whose ambitions could not be anticipated. She continued to move through Dodge City, observing, analyzing, and intervening where necessary. Her ability to adapt and respond quickly to changing circumstances ensured that she maintained her edge. Every encounter, every decision, and every action reinforced her authority and strengthened her position within the town. The citizens of Dodge City could feel the weight of her influence in every interaction. Merchants consulted her before making deals, townsfolk whispered her name in caution, and rival gangs approached her with hesitation. Even the lawmen recognized her presence as a force that could not be ignored. She had become both a stabilizing and destabilizing force, a presence that enforced respect, punished betrayal, and maintained a balance that only she could control. As the sun set on another day, Ravenhair reflected on the progress she had made. The town was no longer a place she had merely entered. It was a place she shaped, influenced, and controlled. The streets carried her mark, the citizens knew her authority, and the rival factions understood the cost of challenging her. Dodge City had become a living extension of her strategy, a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and calculated power plays. She had taken the chaos of the town and turned it into a tool for both survival and influence. That night, as the town settled into an uneasy quiet, Ravenhair stood atop a rooftop, surveying the streets below. She could see the signs of tension, the subtle movements of allies and rivals, and the quiet whispers of citizens who now understood the reach of her influence. Dodge City was no longer merely a backdrop for her story. It was a stage on which her actions shaped the lives of everyone who lived there. Her presence had turned the town into a place of constant vigilance, where fear, respect, and careful calculation dictated behavior. Even in the quiet of the night, Ravenhair remained alert. She understood that the town's descent into chaos was not complete. Rival factions would continue to test her, alliances could shift, and hidden dangers lurked in the shadows. She had learned long ago that control was never permanent, and that true power required both intelligence and adaptability. She would remain vigilant, ready to respond to any threat, and prepared to ensure that Dodge City continued to bend to her influence. By the time the stars illuminated the vast plains beyond the town, Ravenhair had solidified her presence in Dodge City. She had managed the chaos, confronted threats, and maintained her authority. The town had begun to understand that her power was not a fleeting rumor, but a reality that shaped their daily lives. Dodge City had become a place where survival required careful observation, loyalty, and respect for the $2 squaw. And as the quiet night stretched across the town, one truth remained clear. The full measure of Ravenhair's influence was only beginning to reveal itself, and the coming days would test the town in ways that no one could yet imagine. The sun rose over Dodge City with an almost eerie calm, as if the town itself knew that the day would mark a turning point. For weeks the streets had been tense, every face carrying the weight of fear and uncertainty. Rumors of the $2 squaw's power had spread far and wide, reaching even the neighboring towns. Merchants whispered in hushed tones, children peered cautiously from windows, and cowhands gripped the handles of their pistols with more care than usual. Ravenhair, standing on the edge of town where the horizon met the dusty plains, felt the anticipation in the air. Today everything she had built, the alliances, the influence, the carefully laid plans, would face its ultimate test. The rival gangs, sensing that her hold over Dodge City had become nearly absolute, had decided to act together. They would confront her with overwhelming numbers, hoping to break her spirit and reclaim their control over the town. Word of their movement spread quickly, and even the townspeople could sense the tension rising. Every alley, every saloon, every rooftop seemed to hold a watchful eye. The town itself became a living entity, responding to the coming storm with the quiet alertness of something that had seen chaos before. But no one in Dodge City had ever faced anything like Ravenhair. Ravenhair did not panic. She had anticipated this moment, and her preparation was meticulous. She moved quietly through the town, checking her allies' positions, ensuring that escape routes and defensive points were known and secure. Silas Crane, her trusted informant, relayed news of the gang's movements, while loyal townsfolk quietly reinforced barricades, moved wagons into strategic positions, and ensured that the citizens were as safe as possible. She was both strategist and warrior, able to anticipate the chaos before it unfolded. By mid-morning, the gangs had entered Dodge City in force. They moved through the streets with confidence, believing that sheer numbers would ensure victory. But Ravenhair had already planned for this. Hidden behind barricades and inside buildings, her allies watched, ready to act at the right moment. She had studied the layout of the town, the positions of every building, and the movement of every street. Dodge City itself had become a battlefield she knew intimately. Every corner, every shadow, every pathway could be used to her advantage. The confrontation began subtly, with small skirmishes in the alleys and quick, precise strikes against the gang members. Ravenhair herself appeared where needed, her presence commanding attention and inspiring her allies. Her strategy was not reckless. She avoided unnecessary bloodshed while using skill, timing, and intelligence to control the chaos. Each move was calculated, designed to outmaneuver her enemies, isolate their leaders, and dismantle their confidence. By the time the main group of gang leaders realized what was happening, their carefully planned attack had already been turned against them. The streets of Dodge City, once filled with the routine bustle of daily life, now became a stage for an extraordinary display of strategy and resolve. Citizens who had remained in their homes watched in awe as Ravenhair moved through the town, coordinating defenses, guiding allies, and confronting the most dangerous opponents directly. Every action she took reinforced her reputation as a figure who could not be challenged lightly. Even those who had doubted her ability now recognized that she was a force of both intelligence and courage. The first major confrontation took place in the central square, near the saloon where she had first arrived. The gang leaders, frustrated by their inability to coordinate their forces, rushed forward with reckless aggression. Ravenhair met them head-on, her movements precise and deliberate. She did not fight blindly. She used the town itself as a weapon. Obstacles, vantage points, and carefully timed distractions allowed her to control the pace of the battle. Her allies, well-positioned and well-informed, supported her in a coordinated manner, ensuring that the gang's numerical advantage was neutralized. As the battle continued, the full impact of Ravenhair's influence became clear. Dodge City was no longer merely a backdrop. It had become an active participant in the conflict. Citizens had hidden themselves in safe locations, observing and learning. Merchants and workers had provided supplies and information. Even the seemingly ordinary townsfolk, once quiet and unnoticed, played a role in the defense of the town. Ravenhair's presence had transformed the community, and the result was a combination of fear, respect, and determination that gave her an almost unstoppable edge. The climax of the confrontation came in the streets near Hell's Half-Acre, the area of Dodge City notorious for its lawlessness and violence. Here, Ravenhair faced the remaining gang leaders, the ones who had survived the earlier skirmishes and hoped to strike her down directly. They moved with aggression, confident that they could overpower her with brute force. But Ravenhair was ready. Every movement she made was deliberate, every step calculated, and every strike precise. She anticipated their attacks, countered their moves, and turned their aggression into opportunities for her advantage. By the time the sun reached its highest point, the remaining gang leaders were defeated, their plans unraveled, and the streets of Hell's Half-Acre were quiet once more. The aftermath was both dramatic and transformative. Dodge City had been tested, its residents had faced the chaos brought by outside forces, and they had survived because of Ravenhair's skill, strategy, and leadership. The town bore the marks of the conflict, damaged buildings, abandoned wagons, and scattered debris, but it also bore a new sense of order. Citizens had learned to recognize the importance of vigilance, cooperation, and respect for those who wielded authority wisely. The streets, while scarred, carried a new story of resilience, shaped largely by the actions of the $2 squaw. Ravenhair, standing at the edge of Hell's Half-Acre, surveyed the town she had helped to save and control. She had achieved more than revenge. She had transformed Dodge City itself. The gangs were gone, alliances were reinforced, and the people of the town had learned the value of strategy, loyalty, and courage. Her reputation, once a whisper on the wind, was now a clear and undeniable truth. She had turned Dodge City into a place where her presence dictated the balance between order and chaos. But Ravenhair knew that her work was never truly finished. Dodge City would continue to face challenges, new threats would emerge, and the balance she had created could be tested again. Yet for now, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. She had achieved what she had set out to do. She had confronted her enemies, asserted her authority, and ensured that the town would never forget the consequences of underestimating her. As the sun set over the town, casting long shadows across the streets and buildings, the people of Dodge City began to emerge from their homes. They moved with cautious optimism, tending to their daily lives while carrying with them the memory of the day's events. Merchants reopened their shops, children played quietly in the streets, and cowhands returned to their routines, all under the watchful eyes of the $2 squaw. Her presence remained a constant reminder that Dodge City had been tested and had endured because of her skill, strategy, and leadership. In the quiet of the evening, Ravenhair walked through the streets she had helped to shape. She nodded to those who had supported her, acknowledged the resilience of the townsfolk, and maintained her vigilant awareness of the town's ongoing dynamics. Dodge City was forever changed not just by the battles that had taken place, but by the influence of a single determined individual who had arrived with a purpose and left a mark that would endure. By nightfall, the town had settled into a wary peace. The streets, though still filled with the echoes of the day's conflict, carried a sense of cautious hope. Citizens knew that Dodge City had survived a trial, guided and protected by the $2 Squaw, and that her presence had ensured the town's safety and order. Ravenhair, standing on the outskirts once more, looked out over the quiet town with a sense of accomplishment. Her mission was complete. Her revenge had been realized, and Dodge City had been transformed under her influence. Even as she prepared to leave the town behind, her legacy remained. Stories of her skill, courage, and strategic mind would be told for years to come. The $2 Squaw had not only confronted her enemies and asserted her power, but had also reshaped the town, leaving a lasting impression on every resident who had witnessed her actions. Dodge City would remember her name, her deeds, and the day when a single woman changed the course of the town's history. Ravenhair mounted her horse and looked back one final time. The streets were calm, the citizens cautiously resuming their lives, and the town, though scarred by conflict, stood stronger than before. She had turned Dodge City into a place of balance, where fear, respect, and loyalty were carefully measured, and where her influence would remain long after she had ridden away. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the plains, and with it, the story of the $2 Squaw of Hell's Half Acre reached its powerful conclusion. As she rode into the distance, the wind caught her raven hair, and her shadow stretched across the town she had forever changed. Dodge City, a place once filled with chaos and uncertainty, had emerged under her influence as a town shaped by strategy, skill, and the indelible mark of a determined and fearless woman. The story of Ravenhair and the blood price she commanded would live on in the whispers of townsfolk, the memories of survivors, and the history of a town that had learned to survive, adapt, and endure because of her.